Hey folks, thank you for joining me for Meet the Maker. My name is Sarah from Addison Public Library, and I am joined by Monica from Geeks a GoGo, here to talk about cosplaying. Monica, could you tell us a little bit about you, what Geeks a GoGo is, and what cosplaying is?
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for asking me to be here today in your MakeHER series. I am so excited to talk about cosplay. Hello, everyone. I'm Monica Paprocki. I'm from geeksagogo.com, and Geeks a GoGo is a geek news and entertainment website. By day, I'm an accountant, but in my spare time, I'm actually a professional cosplayer. I compete, judge, and I actually cosplay for companies as well. So those are a little bit about what I do on the website and on my cosplay career.
Cool. And for those who might not be familiar with cosplay, can you describe a little bit about what cosplay is and what cons are?
Absolutely. Cosplay is costume play. It's basically a combination of both words. It's when people dress up as characters or art that they actually come to love and want to bring to life because of how passionate they are about this type of art form or character. That's one of the favorite things I like about cosplaying, is being able to also interpret it my own way, like give my own interpretation of the character or the art that I like. Conventions or Comic Cons are events where a lot of people go and celebrate their fandom. So whether it's comic books or role-playing games, board games, anime, you name it, it's all in a comic book or on a Comic Con, and you'll find it there.
Cool. And so you make your own costumes. So can you tell us what different types of skills you incorporate into your costume making to actually get your costumes put together?
This one's a fun question to answer. So I am actually a jack of all trades with my cosplaying and costuming. I tend to dabble on every single aspect of it. So I do sewing, armor making or foam making. I do 3D printing as well. And I also dabble with electronics a lot on my creations.
Cool. So you're really wrapping all sorts of skills in there to get your costumes completed.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to incorporate a new skill into every cosplay that I create. Starting in 2017, I got really passionate into cosplaying. It's just something that I really enjoyed because art is something that I always wanted to pursue growing up. So I made it a point from 2017 onwards to be able to learn a new skill to enhance my cosplaying. So that's kind of like what started me going from one type of skill, which I really became proficient in armor first, or foam making. Then I made my way to sewing, then electronics, and then 3D printing.
So since you started with armor making, do you want to talk about that right now? Like how do you make your props? How do you make your armor and what tools you need?
Absolutely. So luckily we're in my workshop right now. So this is my small section in the house. Luckily, my husband and I have a lot of space in this house to have this, because cosplaying can be a little bit overwhelming. Now, the things that I'm going to be showing today that you will need to create an armor or foam armor, it may be overwhelming because it's a lot of stuff, but keep in mind, these are things that I have accumulated over the years. So let's start with the basics. So number one is you need a cutting tool. This is just a regular box cutter. This one is a cutting mat. Now this comes in a lot of different sizes. It's a self-healing mat. The reason why I mentioned a cutting board, because that way you will save your furniture. So if we have our younger audiences like watching this, if you are wanting to do foam armor, and if you're using tools like this, any sharp tools or any heating tools, please ask an adult to help supervise or help you. You also have a rotary tool. Your rotary tool is one of kind of like your Swiss Army knives of making foam armor. So it's not only used for cutting, you can actually make textures, different textures on foam using this. You can also cut foam with it if you have like a circular saw like attached to it. and you can make like different patterns with it. So it's a really versatile tool to have, definitely for armor making. Let's see, heat gun. You see it hanging right up here.
Yes.
This huge yellow heat gun over here. It goes up like, I think 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure to set your heat gun to low first and test it out before you blast it to high, just to kind of like get a better feel of how to use it. Lastly, you're going to need your foam. So you have different thicknesses of foam. The 2 to 3 millimeter foam I use is for detailing, and you can actually use craft foam that you find in like craft stores like Joann's and Michael's. These gray foam that I'm holding up, these are HD foam. My friend SKS Props actually sells this. This is one of his products, and he sells this out of like Dick Blick Art Supplies or Blick Arts.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a really nice foam. It's really soft, very beginner friendly. I do recommend that a lot. Metal rulers are actually good to have because when you're cutting foam, you can use it as a guide and it wouldn't ruin your rulers basically. Oh, of course, you need glue.
Yes.
You need glue. So the number one glue that we use for foam making is contact cement, or this is like, it says all-purpose cement, but it's really, really strong, pungent, potent stuff. When I use this glue, I have an open window with an exhaust fan blowing out the fumes. This is very dangerous to inhale, but this is the best glue to use for gluing your foam pieces together.
Yes, because regular Elmer's glue won't really do the trick, right? That foam won't stick.
Absolutely. And we've tried different types of glue, like over the years, a lot of people have tried glue gun, which also works, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, because of the temperature of it, sometimes it will melt the foam. And at other times when it does adhere perfectly, when you're out and it's summertime, it actually melts at some point when it's too hot out, or even your body temperature like affects it as well. So it just tends to just kind of like slip away, and you don't want that happening when you're like cosplaying.
No, the last thing you want is for your costume to fall apart while you're walking through a con.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you an idea, this is kind of like a piece for my thigh armor, and I put this together last night and I glued it with that contact cement that I was mentioning earlier. You stick them together when the glue's a little bit dry, like not totally dry, but like a little bit dry. When you touch it, it's like not sticking back to your fingers, and that's the right time to like put them together. And once it's glued together, you will never be able to like remove them. Once you're done gluing pieces together, you need to blast this with a heat gun to kind of like seal the pores. And the reason why you do that is because foam is really porous. So any type of paint or anything at all, it will go through the pores. Like it will just absorb it. It seals it and gets rid of that porous texture. So that will prep you from priming your surface and then painting it.
I had no idea about the sealing with the heat gun until just now. That makes so much sense. I have tried to paint foam and it has never worked because
it's like a sponge, right? Yeah, it's like a sponge. It just kind of like drinks it all in, and you're like, what happened to my paint? It's all, if you see it slightly change color, then that's a good sign to move on to another section of the foam, because if you're on there too long, it starts to bubble up and you're burning it. The safety stuff that I use when I'm doing foam work is I have a mask. This is a respirator. So it has a dust guard as well as a filter to help with the fumes from the glue, and also from sanding the foam when I'm doing textures or like just smoothing out the surface. And goggles. Goggles are very nice to have. I always recommend people just buy these. They're really cheap. You can buy them at the hardware store or Amazon. Really cheap stuff, and it will save you from inhaling these like dangerous chemicals.
Yes, as we learned during this pandemic, PPE is really important, and you want to make sure you have the right PPE for what you need. So a regular mask is not going to help. You have to have that respirator with those dust and chemicals.
Absolutely. Yep.
If you don't mind, I do spot a sword behind you. Can you show our
Oh,
audience? I'm assuming that's made out of foam.
this is actually a 3D printed sword.
Oh, okay.
So this is a sword that my husband and I 3D printed. We ended up looking for a file. What's nice about 3D printing is there's files readily available out there for generic weapons that you can use. So I decided to pick this shape of a sword, and I just spray painted it to make it look like this. I added some leather details on the handle just to make it look a little bit more realistic. These are actually several sections that we've glued together. The hilt is one section, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 sections. It was sliced up, but yeah, we had to do that in pieces. Once the pieces were all printed up, we use an aluminum rod to go through. Actually, here's an example of it. This is an aluminum rod that I use a lot on a lot of my costuming because it's nice and sturdy and it won't break even with pressure. Like it takes a while, or it takes a lot of pressure to bend it.
Yeah.
And it works really well with weapons to keep them really nice and like rigid. At the same time, like it keeps them strong too. So
Cool. Thank you for showing us the sword.
thank you.
So one of your other skills is sewing, and that's probably the first skill people think about when they hear costumes, is sewing these costumes together and the fabric. How did you learn how to sew, and what kind of projects did you first start off with to build your sewing skills?
So this is going to like give me like the throwback like moment here, because I actually learned how to sew in home economics class back in the Philippines when I was in grade school, and we had to sew shorts. So that's the very first thing I've ever sewn in my entire life, and of course I wasn't good at it. It was too small when I wore it. But yeah, like from there I kind of like abandoned that skill because I just didn't think I was good at it. And then I think the first biggest sewing project that I did, most ambitious one that I did, was when I had this Phoenix costume that I made. It needed to have this gold dress that I can't find anywhere at that time. So I had to sew it from scratch. So I had to relearn and teach myself how to do it. And I did watch a lot of YouTube videos while trying to relearn how to sew. So that's kind of like how I learned how to do it. Practicing helps out a lot as well. You don't come out as the best sewer straight from watching a video. You really have to like keep practicing and doing it, and it does take time. And I know it does sound intimidating for some, but honestly, like once you get the hang of the basics for sewing, you're just going to be so inspired to create so many things. The next big build that I did was Arthenia the Sixth, which is this character from a miniature game company. And here's how I incorporated sewing and 3D printing. So it's kind of like going back to 3D printing. So this is the outer skirt, and it's really heavy because of all the 3D printed pieces and the beads, but I actually had to hand sew everything. So just to give you an idea, these orangey, like the warmer tone.
Just to clarify for our viewers, all of those beads, those geometric shape beads, were 3D printed and then sewn on to your skirt, correct?
Yes, so absolutely. So this arched one, I actually had to create it at TinkerCAD. And from what I understand, Sarah, you do have classes for TinkerCAD in the library as well?
Yes, we do have a 3D printer. And then we recommend the website TinkerCAD for anyone who wants to learn how to 3D design. TinkerCAD has some phenomenal tutorials on their own to learn at home. And then we occasionally have a class at the library to learn some of the basics to get started. So something like this could easily be done at our library.
Absolutely. And that's kind of like that's what I love about your library. I use TinkerCAD a lot on my costuming, and when it came time to create these beads, this one in particular, you couldn't find a bead like that anywhere.
No.
So I actually had to create this at TinkerCAD, and the same with these square ones, like anything that's this color. So this one, the circle, and this square with the 4 circles in it.
Yeah.
I had to create them in TinkerCAD first, and I had to learn right away. Like I had a week to learn everything because I basically printed for each bead. I think I printed more than 50 for each bead just so that I can cover the entirety of the skirt.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of stuff to print out. But TinkerCAD is definitely like a really, really beginner friendly free online software that you can use to 3D print your things.
Yes, and for those who are not familiar with TinkerCAD, as Monica mentioned, it's free and it's built, the designing feature is built off of shapes. So anything geometric is relatively easy to design because it's all based off of different building blocks and shapes. I will want to mention, so here at Addison, we have one 3D printer. So if you plan to do a project like Monica's, please plan very far in advance because we just have the one printer for all of our residents and
Yep.
it can take a while.
Yep. And please share with everybody. Don't hog the 3D printer. If the library 3D printer is not available, TinkerCAD does have partner 3D printer printing companies that you can actually kind of like outsource your prints to. So you can download your file or like share your file to these companies and they'll print it for you. So that's another option as well.
Yeah, 3D printing is one of those industries that has gained in popularity over the last 10 years. So there's a lot of options out there for 3D printing services. Just to kind of mention a little bit more about our 3D printer, we print only in PLA filament, which is a soft plastic. It's a biodegradable plastic. So anyone who wants something that's more durable and harder, there's other filaments out there like ABS or nylon or like metal blended or wood blended if you want certain textures. And so those are filaments that you can find 3D printing services to print in. So you get a really unique print for your project.
Yeah. And like resin printers too. We have a resin printer downstairs and we've been using it to print miniatures for our D&D games.
Yes, I want to get a resin printer for Addison for the same resin printers are great for those miniature detailed jewelry, D&D figurines, board games, anything that's less than an inch. Those are great with.
Yep. Just a word of caution for that. You really need vented windows or you really need good ventilation for that. So like with anything that I'm showing you today, I think sewing is probably the only safer option that you don't really need a lot of like stuff on you to be safe, aside from the part where you use needles and scissors. But other than that, definitely wear your protective gear, wear gloves when you're handling resin 3D prints and whatnot.
Yes. And here at the library, we also have sewing machines that patrons can use.
Oh,
we also have a database called Creative Bug. A lot of libraries subscribe to this. Addison has a subscription. So if you have an Addison Public Library card, you get access to it for free. If you're not an Addison resident, I recommend reaching out to your home library because they might be a subscriber. And Creative Bug is owned by Joanne Fabrics, and it has a lot of crafting and art tutorials, including a whole list of sewing. So for our residents, we always recommend Creative Bug as a good learning database tutorial where you can actually walk through projects through their database for free. So,
that's awesome.
yeah. And so at the very beginning, you mentioned how you're an accountant.
Yeah.
So how has being an accountant helped you learn sewing and plan these projects?
Oh, there's a really long list of stuff that I can say about, like incorporating my accounting to my cosplaying.
Mm-hmm.
Accounting can, like help with a lot of things with budgeting. Cosplay is a huge part of that. Cosplay can get a little bit expensive sometimes, whether you buy your costume or you make your costume, you kind of like have to budget. your stuff or how much you're spending on creating or buying your costume. So that plays a huge part of how I plan out my costuming. When I send out proposals to companies on cosplays that they want me to make for their product as part of their marketing strategy, I use accounting a lot for that as well. So I price out my build, beginning with my time spent for creating the costume or the cosplay, to the materials that I use, and then of course like being able to get a quote on uh being at the convention and wearing it for a certain amount of time is another thing. So that accounting skill has become really useful for that.
And I do want to emphasize there, because you mentioned how you submit proposals to companies. So you have turned this hobby of yours into a second job, essentially. You get paid to do this, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the really fun part about all this. It really started out as a hobby, but ever since I was little, I've always wanted to pursue something in the arts and fashion. This kind of like inspired me to kind of like live out my childhood dream of being able to do that. And it's something that I really enjoy doing. I love collaborating with a lot of companies and making their characters come to life through cosplay, and being able to challenge myself with all the numerous skills that I have, like just creating something. It just kind of like seeing my clients like eyes like light up when they see their character, like, oh, that character's actually here in our booth right now, you know. That's when I decided to pursue it as a second job. I do keep my accounting job just because it I also enjoy it. It's
Yeah.
just as simple as that. Like a lot of people hate numbers, but I actually work as an accountant for nonprofit companies, and it's something that I told myself, if I'm going to continue this path of being an accountant, I'm not going to forget my art, first off. And second, I would work for nonprofit organizations because I'm very passionate about these types of organizations.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear the partnership you've made of like math and art. Because a lot of the times we think of those as like separate hobbies, separate skills, and you've really found a way to kind of combine both those into both of your careers, really. So that's cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of math involved in cosplaying too, like measuring. Measuring is a huge part of it, like measuring your physique to fit patterns for you to sew.
Yes.
It even in electronics too, just to be able to like build your circuit and stuff like that. You know, it's such a huge part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think you can ever leave math out of the equation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Always a good, always fun hearing those puns. So back in 2018, you made a very elaborate costume. Can you tell our viewers about what this costume was and a little bit about how you made it?
My Phoenix Monster cosplay. This character was actually from a board game called Rising Sun from Cool Mini or Not. And I saw the design and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is mind blowing. But what if I cosplayed it, right? Because I'm crazy. So, me being me, I actually emailed the company and I told them, "Hi, you know, I'm a cosplayer based out of Chicago, and I'm really interested in cosplaying this character." Long story short, they gave me everything I needed. They gave me the 3D rendering of the miniature, and I started from there. It was a lot of work for 4 months because I had to build this thing in 4 months for competition. I was building this cosplay to compete for Crown Championships of Cosplay in C2E2, which is this big convention that happens every year in Chicago. So anyway, like this Phoenix build, there were so many components of it that I had to learn on the fly in a span of 4 months. And I had to relearn how to sew. I had to build this massive wig that was literally 2 feet tall. The wings was, in a nutshell, like I'm just gonna shorten what it's really made of. Aside from the feathers and the fabric that holds the feathers together, It is made out of metal, aluminum posts or aluminum tubes, just like what I showed you earlier. Linear actuators, which is if you're familiar with the things that lift up like hidden TVs, that's basically the same mechanism for it, or the exact mechanism for it. They were not cheap. They're very expensive. And they can actually, each actuator can actually lift 2 of me. So that's how strong they were. 12-volt batteries and a garage door opener. In a nutshell, that's what it's created with.
And
Like
so
those
all that
materials.
together, I mean, you actually had wings that functionally opened and closed, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you found you found the building plans online. You didn't have to engineer this yourself. There's resources out there, right?
Absolutely. So I may have like told everyone like what it's made out of, but please support this creator, and her name is Crooked Feather. Please support her, because without her teaching everyone how to build wings, she's the OG, she's the original person who created this design. Please support her Patreon if you want to learn how to make these wings. And she's doing the community a service of actually teaching the right way of doing it, because you don't have to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about art and cosplay in general. I feel like there's always this great network of people willing to provide resources or to take the time. And for many of them, as you mentioned, it's their livelihood. They're asking for some sort of fee because they have spent so much of their time to do this.
But this is a shoulder pauldron that I created this week, and I actually used, so this is for my cosplay that's coming up.
Cool.
So this is kind of like what it's gonna look like. I'm gonna have 2 of these, but basically it's a pre-made pattern. And I think when it's on sale, it was only $3 just for the pattern set.
Wow.
When I print out the patterns and I cut them out, I buy like cardboard sheets from the dollar store, because they're $1 for like the big cardboard sheets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I cut the pattern there first, and then tape them up with masking tape, tape them together, and then put them on your body. If you like the proportion of it, then cut it, then transfer it to foam, and then cut your foam, because foam can get really expensive. So that's like my #1 tip for you.
Yes, they always say, measure twice, cut once, but it always helps to have like a test cut, that paper, that foam, or sorry, cardboard, to test with before you do the real deal.
We try to encourage people to do mock-ups first, because even with sewing, we do mock-ups with sewing. Like you go to the thrift store and just buy yourself like some used bed sheets, wash them first, of course. wash the bed sheets after you buy them, and then when you're creating like an elaborate dress or something like that, before you cut it on the actual fabric that you're going to be using, do a mock-up first, and that will save you not just money but time, because yeah, you're not just cutting away this expensive fabric.
Yes, and it always helps also. I'm also short. I'm about 5 feet myself. So every pair of pants that I own, I've had to hem for my height. And the tip I always tell people is use a very loose, like basting stitch. Just get like a very loose stitch so you can confirm it's gonna fit you right before you do your real stitch, because it's a lot easier to take the stitching out, the threads out, when it's very loose than when it's a finished tight stitch.
Yep.
So that's always a good trick that I always recommend for people too.
Yeah, it's a very good tip. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely do that.
Yes. So one last question I kind of wanted to ask is, we've talked about all of your different skills and some of your projects. Now, for the people in our audience who are inspired to cosplay, what are some guidelines that you recommend they follow to get into cosplay, and suggestions for them?
I have 2 main ones that I always encourage people to follow when they cosplay. And the first one is to always keep it fun. I feel a lot of people are very intimidated or very nitpicky with their cosplaying. Cosplaying is supposed to be fun, but if you're just cosplaying for fun, make it less stressful for yourself. Like buy pre-made stuff and embellish it, or buy pre-made stuff, or buy an entire costume. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there was always a stigma about buying costumes, and now it's become the norm because, as I've said, cosplay is supposed to be fun and it's supposed to be enjoyable. The second important one that I want to suggest when people want to start cosplaying is because I'm part of the Chicago POC, which means people of color cosplay out here in Chicago. We like to promote that cosplaying, that someone's culture is not a cosplay. So what that means is cosplay the character, but not their skin tone. So please don't alter your skin tone to that character. Just cosplay the actual character and not their skin tone. And if you are ever wanting to cosplay a character that depicts a different race, please do your research first before you do. There's a lot of, not really rules, but it's more of a cultural appropriation thing. Just try to avoid cultural appropriation when you're creating your cosplay, and be very respectful of other people's cultures. There's a lot to discuss with this type of topic, and we do have a lot of resources out there for you. If you want to go into a deep dive on what does it mean to cosplay character that's POC or a person of color, we do have a video created by SheProp, which is another organization that I'm a part of, that we created specifically to answer these types of questions. And of course, we do have a panel on it as well on my YouTube channel at Geeks GoGo, if that's something that you would like to learn more about.
Thank you so much for providing that guideline for everyone so they can cosplay both fun and respectfully.
Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions at all about a particular cosplay that you've been wanting to cosplay and just don't know how to go about doing it. I always get asked a lot, and I want to be able to help out. So please feel free to just hit me up on all of my social media.
Well, thank you, Monica, for joining me for Meet the Maker. I know I've enjoyed hearing you talk about your cosplaying, and I'm sure our viewers did as well. If you want to know more about Monica's cosplaying, you can go to her website, geeksagogo.com. We have the link for that in our video description. You can also follow her on social media at geeksagogo. And we will also supply links for the SheProp presentation on Can I Cosplay That? And a link to the Facebook group for Chicago POC Cosplay. We'll also add a link to the Creative Studio page for Addison Public Library, so that if you want to use some of our equipment for your cosplaying, you can get all of that information on our page for our equipment. Thanks for joining us. It was nice talking with you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. Good night,
Yes.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.